Raise your hand now if you won't make that pledge tonight. Mr. Trump.
I cannot say I have to respect the person that, if it's not me, the person that wins. And I am discussing it with everybody, but I'm talking about a lot of leverage. We want to win, and we will win. The RNC has been absolutely terrific over the last 2-month period. And as you know, that's what I've wanted. I've wanted fairness. The best way for the Republicans to win is if I win the nomination and go directly against whoever they happen to put up. And for that reason, I have signed the pledge.
Donald Trump today, almost a month after that debate answer, has signed this loyalty pledge, pledging to remain in the Republican Party and not to run against a possible other Republican nominee if he's not that person. Let's bring in a special expanded panel. Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume, Charles Lane, opinion writer for The Washington Post, Nina Easton, columnist for Fortune magazine, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles.
Look, I think we have to start with a journalistic note, which is that when you posed the question, you got a lot of criticism later from Trump supporters and Trump himself that it was somehow unfair or illegitimate to ask that question. I think what we saw today was retroactive vindication, not only of the legitimacy of your question, but its importance. We had a whole day devoted to this, and I think you asked the right question at the right time, and now we have a different answer.
Well, it was a day about this, yes. And isn't that something? Like, it became this event,
yeah.
And it became this news conference that is his strength. It's in his wheelhouse to answer all these questions and become the moment.
And that's why he does have the potential to defy history, because this was a moment of victory, I have to say, for the RNC, which was flummoxed from the outset on how to deal with this force of nature. Now he will be within the ranks of the party, and you have to wonder how many people within the RNC are silently betting that he won't win. They're betting based on historical trends, like the fact that polls in this period in 2008 showed Rudy Giuliani ahead up by 30. We've seen in the past outliers like a Mike Huckabee or a Buchanan not go very far, so a top out. So people are betting that that's what's going to happen here. But here's a flip side of that pledge. If he does defy history and if he does get the nomination, the other candidates are bound to support him now.
Right, and they did do that by not raising their hands on the debate night. Today, by all accounts, all the other candidates have signed this pledge. Chris Christie did it on our air.
I already said on August 6th, I'm going to support the Republican nominee for president, whoever that is, whether it's myself or whether it's one of the other 16 folks who are running. And I don't need Reince Priebus to come and meet with me before deciding whether to do this or not. So there you go. September 3rd, 15, I'm in. I signed.
All right. Mr. Trump told me yesterday he'd support you over Hillary Clinton if you get the nomination. Would you support him?
Yeah, I would, of course. Of course I would. We need to be unified. We need to win.
Jeb Bush did tweet out also after this whole big thing about the pledge, voted Republican since 1972 in a handwritten note on Twitter. Chuck.
I got to say, not to sound an overly skeptical note here, I don't know if this is a binding legal document, like what the legal status of this thing really is, and whether it's even worth the paper it's printed on. But it is, yeah, okay, I guess you could say it's a victory for the RNC by keeping him on sides, at least for the time being. But it's a little bit of a defeat, too, because remember the autopsy after 2012 and how we have to change the tone of the Republican Party and reach out to Latino voters and et cetera, et cetera. And now Trump has forced them to embrace him. And to have even Jeb Bush, who's going around the country in Spanish, talking about what a phony conservative Trump is, now being put on the spot and made to, in fact, endorse him against Hillary. We'll see how this plays out, but I think it is a two-way street.
You know, Brett, I had dared to think when I was waiting for the decision, that if he did go ahead and agree to sign the pledge, instead of once again putting his thumb in the eye of the Republican Party, as he has repeatedly done, not only to the party but to many of its candidates, that it would not go down well with his supporters. Well, boy, was I wrong. I mean, I've heard from a lot of them today, and one has the distinct impression that they were going to be with him no matter which way it went. And they didn't even like somebody raising the question. So I think this does not do him any harm, that he goes along with what the party bosses wanted. And my guess is that, that the Trump machine goes on. I will say this.
There's a candidate that is unlike any we've seen.
Unlike any I've ever seen. And I was on, up in Maine for the month of August, and I swore off television, and then I had it on a couple of nights where Trump was giving news conferences and making a speech, and I thought, well, I'll watch a little of this. I was transfixed. You can't take your eyes off the guy. He is the most entertaining political candidate by far I've ever seen. And again today, I heard him say the words that he's going to sign the pledge, and I thought, well, that takes care of that story. And I sat down in my office, and it was on the TV, and next thing you know, I was watching. I couldn't take my eyes off the guy. He is absolutely fascinating. Now, whether this will translate over the long haul, or as Nina suggests, he will fade, I don't know. But for the moment, he's the most interesting thing around.
What precipitated this, though, also was South Carolina, because he had to say that he would run in the Republican Party to be on that ballot, and that's the main state, but other states are considering it. Chuck, you mentioned this back and forth about speaking Spanish. Take a listen to this.
Well, I think that when you get right down to it, we're a nation that speaks English. And I think while we're in this nation, we should be speaking English. And that's how assimilation takes.
The fact that he would say you only can speak English is kind of ridiculous if you think about it. Are we going to close all the foreign language classes? This is a diverse country. We should celebrate that diversity and embrace a set of shared values. And Mr. Trump doesn't believe in those shared values.
Look, I admire the fact that Jeb Bush is multilingual. I admire the fact that so many people are multilingual, and I also think that English is the official language of the United States.
Charles.
Look, I think I support the idea of official English. I've supported it for a longer time. We ought to have one official language, but that's and obviously that's the key to assimilation. But that's a separate issue as to whether when you're in a press conference and somebody who's Spanish-speaking addresses you in Spanish, whether you ought to have the graciousness to answer them in their own language if you're capable of it, as Jeb was. So to me, it's a question of etiquette and sort of being civil with somebody rather than the big principle. If you care about assimilation, then propose and pass a law that makes English the official language of the United States, which I support entirely.
A quick look at these polls came out today. Monmouth National Poll, Trump again up to 30%, double-digit lead. And you do it these head-to-heads. Trump versus Bush, Trump is at 56-37. And then Trump versus Cruz, 48-41. But here's the interesting thing. Donald Trump versus Ben Carson, he loses 55% to 36%. And Carson has seen a move in these polls.
Yeah, cry for civility, I guess, for people wanting Ben Carson. Ben Carson, I think, is incredibly popular with an evangelical audience, and I think we're seeing that. These are very important voters to the primaries. So I think that's what you're going to see. It's important, again, with these early polls to take them with some skepticism. Again, Rudy Giuliani was at 30%. Fred Thompson was at 15%. And John McCain, again, back in the late 2007, was at a distant fourth, and he ended up being the nominee in 2008. So again, is Trump somebody who defies political history? I mean, the way he's able to define people like Jeb Bush by saying he's low energy, this sort of blithely nasty comments that define people so brilliantly in a way, because that's what people have been saying about Jeb Bush, is a smart politician too.
Here's what he said about Ben Carson to the Daily Caller. I think it's a very difficult situation that he'd be placed in. He's really a friend of mine. I just think it's a very difficult situation that he puts himself into, to have a doctor who wasn't creating jobs and would have a nurse or maybe two nurses. This is Donald Trump on Ben Carson.
Well, that's a new line of attack. There are too few nurses in your operating room, and how many jobs are created by a brain operation. I had not heard that line before. But I will say this, what Trump and Carson have in common is they're outsiders. They're not part of, heck, who knew they were even part of the party a few years ago, let alone candidates. And there's a huge appetite on the Republican side and on the Democratic side with Bernie Sanders for people who are not only not establishment, not even really closely attached.
You have to throw Fiorina in there too.
Add Fiorina and Cruz, who I think has been, such a problem for the Republican leadership in Congress, that he can legitimately be seen and is seen as an outsider. You add up the four percentages for each of them, you get to a very big number with people at this stage, this summer, craving a candidate from outside the normal political system.
You've got to admire Trump's creativity. I mean, the idea, who could have imagined that you could find a line of attack on this sort of saintly surgeon by saying that in separating Siamese twins, he wasn't hiring enough people. That requires genius.
Well, next up, Hillary, Benghazi, the emails, and a Clinton aide taking the fifth.